I never thought a single file could derail a presidential campaign. But that's exactly what happened. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. had momentum. The rallies were packed. The headlines were shifting. Independents were flocking to him in droves, and he genuinely believed, no, he knew, that the White House was within reach. Everywhere he went, people cheered like it was 1968 again. His team had crafted the perfect storm, anti-establishment energy, a recognizable name, and just enough controversy to keep cameras rolling. And then came Jasmine Crockett. She had stayed quiet, watching from the back benches of Congress. But those who underestimated her didn't know she was building something. Quietly. Relentlessly. Like a prosecutor stacking evidence before the drop. Then, one afternoon, while Kennedy was giving a triumphant speech in Michigan, her office posted a cryptic message: "The file is public now. You'll want to read it before the next debate." The political world froze. Cable news anchors were scrambling. Twitter, or what was left of it, exploded. No one knew what the file contained, but insiders whispered it would end everything. And it did. Within minutes of Jasmine Crockett's post, journalists were tearing through every public database they could access. The file link, clean, unbranded, and hosted on an obscure congressional subdomain, simply read, RFK Jr., Unredacted Communications, 2021 to 2023, inside. Over 500 pages of emails, transcripts, and private memos. The contents were worse than anyone expected. One email, dated February 2022, showed Kennedy discussing backdoor meetings with pharmaceutical execs he had previously condemned on national TV. Another memo detailed internal polling that revealed he planned to pivot his campaign's messaging, not based on values, but based on which conspiracy theory tested best with undecided voters. The most damning piece? A signed NDA between Kennedy's campaign and a data firm under federal investigation, something his team had repeatedly denied any connection to. Crockett didn't even hold a press conference. She didn't need to. Her office simply issued one line: transparency isn't a weapon, it's a responsibility. That night, Kennedy's campaign manager resigned. 2 key donors pulled out by dawn. But this was only the beginning. Panic hit Kennedy's team like a thunderclap. They huddled in a private suite at the Hay Adams, just blocks from the White House, with Kennedy pacing near the window, his phone buzzing non-stop. News outlets were dissecting every page of the file, while pundits demanded answers he didn't have. Deny, distract, pivot, one strategist offered, desperate. "We're past that," another muttered, holding a tablet. Jasmine Crockett just lit the fuse, and we're standing in the blast zone. Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett remained silent. She didn't tour the networks. She didn't tweet. She let the evidence speak. The pressure mounted. CNN ran a special titled RFK Jr., The Transparency Illusion, while Politico released a detailed timeline showing exactly when Kennedy's public statements contradicted what was in the file. Then, late that night, Kennedy finally faced the press. He stepped behind the podium, looked into the cameras, and said, "We were misled by contractors. I was unaware of many of these documents. My commitment to truth remains firm." But no one bought it. Not after the signature. Not after the memos with his direct edits. Reporters didn't clap when he left the stage. And Crockett? She posted just one sentence the next morning: "You can't lose what was never yours to claim." While the public tore through headlines, something even more brutal unfolded behind closed doors. High-level donors, once Kennedy's lifeline, started dialing each other, not to rally, but to retreat. A group of Silicon Valley backers quietly suspended their bundled support. A veteran GOP consultant, previously considering a Kennedy alliance for an independent super PAC, pulled the plug within hours. Even legacy Democrats who had once cautiously admired his surname now issued statements condemning what the file revealed. The DNC, which had largely ignored Kennedy until this moment, seized the opportunity. Chair Jamie Harrison called a private emergency meeting and reportedly said, "We don't have to beat him. Jasmine already did." Meanwhile, Crockett's name surged in popularity on every platform. Clips of her past committee performances went viral. Her followers tripled overnight. She still hadn't granted a single interview. And yet, her silence screamed louder than Kennedy's press team ever could. RFK Jr. was left grasping for relevance, while Crockett, armed with a file and a conscience, was now being quietly discussed in progressive circles as the next Stacey Abrams, but louder. Inside Kennedy's campaign headquarters, the atmosphere was suffocating. Staffers whispered about job hunting. The communications director hadn't been seen in 48 hours. Emails were being leaked, ironically, to the same journalists Kennedy once claimed were part of the system. Kennedy's inner circle, once fiercely loyal, began fracturing. His deputy policy chief confronted him behind closed doors. "You knew," she said flatly, holding a printed copy of the NDA. "You signed it. And we built our entire platform around exposing these exact people." He didn't deny it. He just stared down at the floor and muttered, "I didn't think it would come out." Outside the room, reporters gathered like vultures. Every press event was now a minefield. A scheduled appearance on Real Time with Bill Maher was cancelled. 3 staffers quit the same day. And Jasmine? She was spotted entering a secure building on Capitol Hill with a stack of new folders. When asked by a passing journalist if more files were coming, she just smiled and said, "I'm not here to play checkers." Kennedy's campaign hadn't just been hit, it was unraveling. 3 days after the first file detonated Kennedy's credibility, Jasmine Crockett's team dropped another bomb. This time, the file wasn't 500 pages. It was just 42. But it was brutal. Labeled, Internal Strategy Brief, RFK Jr., Controlled Opposition, Pitch, the document outlined a presentation delivered to a private group of wealthy political donors in early 2023. The pitch described Kennedy's role not as a real contender, but as a disruption mechanism. "We don't need to win," one slide read. "We just need to fracture the undecideds." Even worse, a transcript of the meeting captured Kennedy allegedly joking, "I'll take just enough votes to cause chaos. Let the big boys clean it up afterward." Within minutes, the headlines wrote themselves: Kennedy campaign, real run or political sabotage. Social media erupted. Hashtags like #RFK exposed and #controlled opposition trended for 48 straight hours. Jasmine Crockett issued one brief statement from the steps of the Capitol: "It's one thing to lose honestly. It's another to pretend you were ever running to win." The political establishment began doing something rare, uniting. Kennedy had become radioactive. Even his die-hard base, frustrated and betrayed, started turning on him. By now, the Kennedy campaign was little more than a name on a ballot. Major staffers walked out en masse. His official website quietly went offline for maintenance. Fundraising dried up completely. Even longtime family allies stopped taking his calls. But the final blow wasn't financial, it was emotional. A leaked voicemail from a private conversation between Kennedy and a former campaign ally hit the airwaves. His voice, once booming with confidence, now trembled, "They think I'm a joke now. Crockett, she didn't just destroy my campaign. She erased my legacy." That line became the pull quote on every evening broadcast. Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett refused to take a victory lap. She redirected all media requests to her legislative work, appearing only briefly on MSNBC to say, "This was never about headlines. It was about truth. And truth doesn't care about your name or your intentions." As Kennedy faded into political irrelevance, Crockett's star rose higher. The media began speculating on a future leadership role, maybe even a VP shortlist for 2028. The irony was undeniable. Kennedy built his run on exposing the system, but it was the system, through a single, fearless Congresswoman, that exposed him first. The takedown of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. sent shockwaves beyond his campaign. Third-party candidates who once saw him as a path clearer now scrambled to separate themselves. Libertarian and Green Party forums were flooded with statements like, "We are not RFK." Political strategists across the spectrum began reassessing the new power centers, especially Jasmine Crockett. She had done what media cycles, party chairs, and even presidential debate moderators couldn't: unravel a popular movement using facts instead of fanfare. Suddenly, she was everywhere, but not in the way typical politicians were. Crockett didn't launch a book. She didn't go on a speaking tour. She quietly pushed forward new legislation on tech transparency, whistleblower protection, and campaign finance reform. Yet, behind the scenes, Democratic leadership was buzzing. Donor dinners, Senate retreats, think tanks, they were all asking the same question: what does Crockett want next? Some speculated a Senate run. Others whispered cabinet material. And still others, especially among younger progressives, started a movement of their own, #Crockett 2028. But Jasmine? She just kept working. When asked about the growing calls for higher office, she replied, "The best way to lead is to do the job you already have, well." Meanwhile, Kennedy's name vanished from the polls. And that one file, simple, damning, and irrefutable, was archived in the Library of Congress as part of a new exhibit titled, "Digital Transparency and the Fall of a Modern Campaign." While the public marveled at Jasmine Crockett's calm precision, few understood the planning that had gone into what many began calling, the file drop heard round the country. The truth? It wasn't spontaneous. Months earlier, Crockett had quietly assembled a bipartisan team of legal analysts, data engineers, and former campaign auditors. Not for sabotage, but for oversight. "We're tired of performative politics," she told her chief of staff during one midnight strategy session. "If we're going to clean up Washington, we need to start with the truth, anyone's truth." What started as a background inquiry into Kennedy's anti-establishment contradictions became a full-blown investigation after one whistleblower, an ex-staffer, slipped her team a flash drive. Encrypted. Time-stamped. Cross-referenced with metadata. Jasmine didn't leak it. She vetted it. The file wasn't a hit piece. It was a case. The level of discipline stunned even veterans on Capitol Hill. One senator reportedly told a colleague, "She could have gone scorched earth, but she chose a controlled burn." Back channels buzzed with praise. Even moderate Republicans admitted, off-record, that Crockett had done what they hadn't dared. A rising Congresswoman, armed with evidence, had brought down a legacy name, and never broke a sweat doing it. But the story wasn't over. Rumors swirled that another name was being looked into. And Crockett's team? Already preparing the next file. By now, everyone in Washington had heard the message loud and clear: if you're running dirty, Jasmine Crockett is watching. Kennedy's collapse wasn't just a scandal, it was a precedent. Congressional aides began scrubbing their bosses' old files. Lobbyists started pulling contracts. PACs whispered nervously in backrooms, unsure if they'd be the next headline. And Jasmine? She was 5 steps ahead. In a closed-door meeting with senior House members, she laid it out plainly: "I didn't expose Kennedy because I hate him. I exposed him because the public deserves to know when someone's running for themselves, not for the people." Then she slid a sealed envelope across the table. No one opened it. But one senior senator, pale and visibly shaken, simply asked, "How many more of those do you have?" She smiled. Not smug, measured. Enough. Word of the moment leaked almost instantly. The envelope became the symbol of Crockett's new status, not just a congresswoman, but a watchdog. A force. A name you feared to see in your inbox. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. had been ready to claim a presidency. But Jasmine Crockett reminded America, a legacy can be erased faster than it's earned, if the truth is louder than the name. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. quietly suspended his campaign just 3 weeks after the first file went public. No speech. No farewell rally. Just a sterile press release at 2 a.m. on a Wednesday, effective immediately. I will be stepping away from the 2024 race. I remain committed to the issues, but I believe my presence would now only serve as a distraction. The media barely covered it. There was no audience left to disappoint. Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett's name became synonymous with accountability. Not with scandal, not with ambition, but with courage. She hadn't run a smear campaign. She'd simply told the truth no one else was willing to. Political science classes began teaching her file drop strategy. Ethics panels invited her to speak. She didn't pose for magazine covers, she issued subpoenas. And across the country, something shifted. Voters, especially younger ones, started paying closer attention to who was funding their candidates. They stopped being dazzled by familiar names and started demanding receipts. When asked years later what her proudest moment in Congress was, Crockett didn't mention the Kennedy file. She pointed to a small, passed bill that increased whistleblower protections by 200%. The truth shouldn't need a hero, she said. It should just need a path. But history would remember the moment one woman, armed with one file, brought down a dynasty, and changed the game forever.